What's up, everybody? Happy Monday. Welcome into the Pack-A-Day podcast. Thank you so incredibly much for taking some time out of your day to join me here on YouTube. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can always follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Have a great show lined up for you today. I have three main topics I want to discuss, including the salary cap, the Rams' potential interest in Aaron Rodgers, and three defensive coordinator candidates that Rob Demovsky reported that Green Bay either will be or already has interviewed. So a lot to discuss in a short period of time. So let's get right to it. Let's start with the Rams' reported interest in Aaron Rodgers and potentially making a run at him. So this was reported by Sam Farmer, and I think it's really worth starting off with the entire quote for clarity's sake. Let's start with the quote. So they considered making a hard run at Aaron Rodgers, but Green Bay was adamant it wasn't trading him. I'm going to read it one more time. Quote, they considered making a hard run at Aaron Rodgers, but Green Bay was adamant it wasn't trading him. So let's break this down piece by piece, right? So the Les Snead and the Rams decide, hey, we're going to go and we're going to get a quarterback, and Jared Goff is not our guy. So there's three names that are potentially out there. There's Deshaun Watson, there's Matthew Stafford, maybe there's Aaron Rodgers. We should probably do our due diligence. And I'm, hypothesizing here a little bit, but you can kind of glean this pretty easily from the quote. We're going to go all in for a quarterback. Let's see what's available, what's out there, and what we might be able to do. So the first part of the quote, they considered making a hard run at Aaron Rodgers. They're in that exploratory phase, right? They've probably already made the decision that Jared Goff's not their guy. They're going in another direction. They're going to spend some serious draft capital, as we've seen, 2 first-round picks, a third-round pick in Jared Goff for Matthew Stafford. Would they have considered going above and beyond that for Aaron Rodgers? I would have to think that they probably would. But they're in those exploratory phases. And the only way that you can know what's available is by calling around and seeing what quarterbacks are in fact available, by calling Houston, by calling Green Bay, by calling Detroit, and any other team that potentially has a quarterback that you'd be interested in. So Les Snead, legitimately, basically in his job description here, is required to call Brian Gutekunst and say, hey, just want to see, is there any chance that Aaron Rodgers is available? And, you have to even more, of course, when Aaron Rodgers makes the comment, maybe my future is in doubt. And when Brian Gutekunst makes the statement by spending a first and a fourth round pick last year on a future quarterback, again, if you're Les Snead, you have to at least make that phone call. And Brian Gutekunst basically says, we're not trading him. And you can get that again from the second part of the quote. Green Bay was adamant it wasn't trading him. So this wasn't even a situation, based on this quote, based on this report, that Brian Gutekunst was like, hey, make us an offer, and if it's 10 first-round picks and Aaron Donald and, all the GameStop stock that you can scrounge up, no, it wasn't anything like that whatsoever. This was legitimately, it's off the table. We're not discussing it. We're not even having this conversation. This conversation didn't even happen. End of story. Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback. And it echoes back to Mark Murphy stating in his Q&A session, we're not idiots. Aaron Rodgers is going to be our quarterback next year. And it makes complete and total sense. And guys and gals and friends of the podcast, Jordan Love may have made a ton of progress through the season last year, but there were a very few of us that were able to see Jordan Love with any sort of practice in training camp last year. Maybe, 100 or so, probably less, probably like 50 or so people in the media that actually got a firsthand glance at Jordan Love in training camp. And I can look you in the eye and I can tell you, maybe he made a ton of progress in the regular season and in practices, but he was nowhere near, and I mean nowhere near, ready to be the backup quarterback last year, much less taking over as the franchise quarterback for Aaron Rodgers. And if you remember, last year, I wrote an article, I said, why Aaron Rodgers could be traded sooner than you think, with the premise that this offseason, Aaron Rodgers could be traded. I had 3 conditions that needed to take place in order for that to happen. The first condition was that Jordan Love had to come in and wow Green Bay basically from the onset, because this isn't that unheard of. Like Russell Wilson was a 3rd-round pick and he wowed from day one, right? We have seen quarterbacks now come into this league and be impressive from day one. And if he came in and they're like, okay, this is our future, this is our guy, that would be step 1 that needed to happen. Step 2 is Aaron Rodgers basically needed to play at the same level he did in 2017, 2018, 2019. Really good, but not great. And Rodgers wasn't just great, he was the MVP of the damn league. So that's strike two. So strike one, Jordan Love was not gangbusters coming in. Strike two, Aaron Rodgers was much better than he was in 17, 18, and 19. And then my third condition is that some team would have to offer Green Bay the moon and the stars and everything like that, which I don't think is unheard of. I'm sure if you're going to get 2 firsts and a third for Matt Stafford and a quarterback, I'm sure you can get even more than that for Aaron Rodgers. So probably, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, condition number 3 was probably checked off. They could probably get a boatload for Aaron Rodgers, but he was the MVP of the league. You're in no position to trade him. And simply put, Jordan Love is not ready. I'm adamant in saying that, and I feel crystal clear in saying that he's not ready to take over. You haven't even seen him in a preseason game. He couldn't beat out Tim Boyle through the entirety of the season for the backup spot. There's just no way that Jordan Love is anywhere near ready. So when they are adamant that they are not trading Aaron Rodgers, that's because they don't have another option. Love you, Tim Boyle, but that would be a step down from Aaron Rodgers, and Jordan Love just simply isn't ready yet. So it is what it is, and I don't think there's any more to this story. And hopefully this puts the Aaron Rodgers potentially being traded story to rest, because if some team was considering making a hard run at Aaron Rodgers and they traded 2 firsts and a third and Jared Goff for Matthew Stafford, you can only imagine what that team was potentially considering giving up for an Aaron Rodgers in the same sort of scenario. So it's done. It's over with. Aaron Rodgers is your quarterback in 2021 and going into hopefully a playoffs and Super Bowl in 2022. So end of story, period. We're putting this to rest. And in finality, a team wanted him and Green Bay was adamant that it wasn't trading him. We're done. End of story. All right, so let's take a look at story number 2, and that was Pat Leonard of the New York Daily News reporting that the NFL Players Association is expecting the salary cap to come in at $180 million or right around there. And we should find out sooner rather than later if that ends up being the case, but that's what the NFL Players Association is preparing it to be. So what does that mean? Well, the minimum that they were expecting it to be was $175 million. And there had recently been some reports that maybe it could go up to 185, 190, maybe even 195 million. So 180, it's not worst case scenario at 175, but it's not a whole heck of a lot better. That $5 million isn't going to help you, get into the game with Aaron Jones, Corey Linsley, and get into maybe some of those conversations. And the only reason I bring this up now, and we'll know it probably later this week or at least in the very near future, is start preparing, because if it's around 180 million, this is going to be a very, very difficult offseason for Green Bay. And I think, players like Aaron Jones, Corey Linsley, those guys are going to find a really hard time getting money from Green Bay that they're looking for. So we all want those players back in some capacity. We can argue all day of whether or not the salary would justify the player and whether you can pay a running back top tier money, whether you can pay Corey Linsley when you've got a Lucas Patrick and an Elton Jenkins that can play the position on the roster. But I think if it's around 180 million, it's not final, but it would take some serious hoop jumping to get those two guys back in Green Bay. So just start preparing yourself just a little bit in that regards. And then last but not least, Rob Demovsky has reported that Green Bay has 3 candidates already that they either have interviewed or are going to interview. And that's Joe Barry, Chris Harris, and Ejiro Evero. So those are the 3 potential candidates. So I did mention Joe Barry as one of my bonus candidates the other day when I did my top 10. None of these 3 were in my top 10 that Green Bay could potentially consider. But I did have Joe Barry in kind of that bonus category. So Joe Barry does have some familiarity with Matt LaFleur. They were together in LA. So he is currently the Chargers passing game coordinator. Went with Brandon Staley to LA when Staley took the head coaching job and became their defensive passing game coordinator. He was the Lions defensive coordinator from 2007 to 2008. He was also the Washington football team's defensive coordinator from 2015 to 2016. Again, he coached with Matt LaFleur in LA. He was the assistant head coach and linebackers coach at the time. And again, is now the passing game coordinator and linebackers coach for the LA Chargers. So that's what his career looks like. He didn't have very successful runs as defensive coordinator when he did have those opportunities. And I think the one question you have to ask is why the short stints? A 2-year stint as a defensive coordinator with the Lions, same thing with Washington, hasn't been able to stick on, hasn't been able to get another opportunity. So why was that? And I'm going to kind of combine that for a second with Ejiro Evero. So Evero was the defensive quality, or this is kind of his background, defensive quality control coach for Tampa, 49ers quality control coach, then 49ers offensive assistant, which I actually like. I like when a coach has coached some offense and some defense, especially when they end up on the defensive side of the ball. I think it just gives them a little bit more insight into what the offense is trying to do. He then became the 49ers defensive assistant after that. Then he went to Green Bay. So he has some experience with the Packers. He was the Packers defensive quality control coach in 2016. And then 2017 to current, he was the safeties coach for LA. Now, both Joe Barry and Ejiro Evero, I think you have to ask this question. The Rams, when Brandon Staley left, had a defensive coordinator opening. When Brandon Staley took the Chargers job, he had a defensive coordinator opening. Neither Joe Barry or Ejiro Evero were considered, didn't get, I don't know if they were considered or not, but they did not get those open positions. So the two people who knew them most, Sean McVay and Brandon Staley, did not feel comfortable in moving either of these people into a defensive coordinator role. LA went with Raheem Morris, I believe it was. So, they went actually outside of the organization. So this is a little bit telling, in my opinion. The two people who probably know these guys best did not make them defensive coordinators for their respective teams. And I think, with Evero, I think you have to wonder, not only did he not get a defensive coordinator job, but he didn't even get a promotion for either team. He's still a safeties coach. It's not like they were able to bump him up to defensive defensive backs coach, and like assistant head coach, or didn't get like a passing game coordinator position, for either team. He stayed as a safeties coach with two, basically coaches that knew him well in positions to promote him and did not. So I think that has to be a little bit of a red flag, and it has to be a little bit of a red flag for Joe Barry as well, that he did not get a coordinator position with either team. He did get the passing game coordinator position along with the linebackers coach position with LA. So he did get a little bit of a promotion going over to the Chargers, but I do think this is a little bit of a red flag. And again, Joe Barry's had stints as defensive coordinator and neither were super successful. Then you come to Chris Harris, Washington's defensive backs coach. So he did coach the entirety of their defensive backs. He was a Bears defensive quality control coach. He was a Chargers assistant defensive backs coach. And then he's been basically a defensive backs coach with Washington since 2020. He did play 7 years in the NFL, was voted a second-team All-Pro back in 2010 with the Bears. He's very inexperienced, however. His only true coaching position, other than an assistant or a quality control coach, was a defensive backs coach with Washington just this past year in 2020. That's it. No passing game coordinator, no defensive coordinator responsibility. He is very raw, very young. And it's not to say that he can't be the right choice, but ideally you'd maybe like to see him have a little bit more experience. One thing I do like about Evero and Joe Barry is they do come from that Brandon Staley defense. And I thought Brandon Staley did a ton of really unique things with that Rams defense, and I think it could become a trend in the NFL. And I think you always want to be at the forefront of that new trend and on the cusp of what's new. I think when Green Bay, even when they got Dom Capers, and I know they ended up winning a Super Bowl with Dom, and it worked out really well to begin with, but that 3-4 trend had kind of already started, and like they were like midway through, like they weren't one of the early adopters to it. I think you always want to be one of the early adopters to that new trend. I'm not saying that Brandon Staley is going to be like this guru that, has developed this new defense that everyone's using, but I do like that they come from that system because I think it has a lot to offer. Any of these three guys do I feel super confident in at the moment? No. Do I think that do I know enough to say they'd be terrible hires? No. I think it's just going to be something that it's three interesting candidates. Chris Harris does intrigue me a little bit. I really liked what Washington did with their defense last year. Of course, having 4 first-round picks on your defensive line that are all really good certainly can help that quite a bit. But I'm intrigued by these three options. I'm not sold on any of them, but it's interesting to know that these were the first three that Green Bay, at least the first three that were reported that Green Bay has interest in and either has interviewed or will interview going forward. So that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to check out Alex Perry Engage on today's audio version of the Pack-A-Day podcast. I'll be right back here tomorrow, of course. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.